Good afternoon. I've been looking at the speakers today on stage and seeing all these big names here. It's quite humbling to be invited up here. So thanks, Kevin and Andrew, for allowing me to speak. OceanScore is, as you said, kind of still a startup. We're reasonably new in the game, so allow me to say a few words about who we are to introduce ourselves. OceanScore has been around for 3 to 4 years by now, and for the last 2 years, we have exclusively focused on the topic of EU ETS and FuelEU, helping our shipping clients commercially succeed in this environment. To give you a feeling who we are, we're actually backed by quite a few very solid names in maritime. If I look at the shipping side, there are names like MSC, like the Döhle Group, like Portline, who are supporting OceanScore. If I'm looking into financial institutions, we're talking about the Dock or Motion Ventures here from Singapore, Stolt Ventures, who are, again, standing behind OceanScore. It's a company of 25 people currently across Europe with hubs in Hamburg, Portugal, and Poland, and just recently opened an office here in Singapore. But I'm not here to talk about OceanScore. I want to talk about FuelEU. And given that this is marine money and not marine compliance or marine technology, I will take a decidedly commercial perspective on the topic. Now, I just want to scare you off a little bit up front about the complexity of FuelEU. What you see here as these formulas, this is what the EU calls the basic formulas to assess your FuelEU compliance, just the basic stuff. And then there's all kinds of discounts, special effects, special rules to it. And given the fact that we are only 90 days or 95 days away from its implementation, the EU is still working on implementation guidelines, and BIMCO is still working on the respective clauses for charter parties and shipments. So it feels a little bit like what we had a year ago with EU ETS. We are supposed to be ready on Jan 1st, but nobody else is ready. But indeed, FuelEU is quite different from EU ETS. And when James this morning talked about what's happening at IMO, I think he explained quite well the difference between a carbon tax and a fuel standard. And we see a similar structure here on these two European regulations. So EU ETS is basically a carbon tax. It's pay as you go. It's rather straightforward from its implementation. And the focus for shipping companies is more on the administrative efficiency or maintaining transparency around this regulation. And at the end of the year, you're paying roughly, if you burn HFO, for example, 220 euros per ton of HFO you've burned to buy the carbon credits at today's price that you need to surrender, or 70 euros per carbon credit in today's market. So keep in mind, 220 euros per ton of HFO burned. And that is if you're sailing in Europe. I'll not take you through the complexities of other trades in and out of Europe. Now, if you're doing FuelEU, actually it's a bit different. You have a bunker standard, and if you are polluting more, emitting more carbon than you're supposed to emit, you accumulate so-called compliance deficits, which later create a penalty. And if you're polluting less, because you're burning the fuels that the EU wants you to burn, you're creating compliance surpluses, which you can later trade. So while EU ETS is all about efficient processes and managing it, the big thing around FuelEU is that you have to make decisions. And there's two basic types of decisions in this. One is around, largely, I'll take you into some more detail, what type of bunkers you want to burn where. And that will lead to a certain compliance position. And the second category of decision is, what do you do with your compliance balance, as it is called, at the end of the year? There's different options. If you decide to go the easy way and say, too much regulation, I can't be bothered, I'll just pay the penalty, actually it's not going to be as expensive as EU ETS. In the current regime, we're talking around 62 euros per ton of HFO versus the 220. But the big difference is these decisions. And if you take the right decisions, you can actually accumulate benefits of burning the right bunkers and behaving the right way, worth hundreds of euros per ton of HFO replaced with other bunkers. So it's a span of the outcomes that shifts the focus from just compliance to making the right decisions in this. So what are these decisions that can be taken? I would say they fall roughly in 2.5 or 3 categories. The first one is, how do you actually get to the bunker standards the EU has prescribed in FuelEU and that's stable for the next 5 years? It's largely the type of bunkers you burn. That's the most important decision. The EU wants you to take you through going for biofuels in the short term, to going to waste-based biofuels in the medium term, to going to e-fuels made of renewable energy in the long term. That's the trajectory the EU is planning for, and that's enforcing with FuelEU. And then there's other decisions around shore power. Do you take it or not? It will become mandatory to be offered in European ports starting in 2030, but there already today is a benefit if you use them, or starting on Jan 1st, 25. And there's discussions around wind-assisted propulsion, e-fuels, and a few other things that can create benefits that are probably less relevant in today's operational real context. First category of decision. Whatever you decide will lead to a compliance balance, plus or minus, and then the next level of decisions will be, what do you do with it? If you run a compliance deficit, which is typically when you burn any type of conventional fuel that we are currently burning, there's 2 ways what you can do. You can just pay the penalty, or you can borrow from the future. Like you would borrow from a bank, you pay a 10% interest rate to the EU and say, well, this year was bad, but next year I'll be better and I'll repay you next year, and so I'll borrow from you at a 10%. Or you can take your compliance deficit and find someone who has accumulated compliance surpluses, and then you build a pool. It's not a commercial pool that we use, it's a compliance pool purely formed for this purpose of FuelEU. And if the pool overall is neutral, the EU says, okay, forget it, it's not my problem, you're okay. The problem is if you're accumulating a deficit, the ones with a surplus will ask you to pay to be joining their pool with a surplus, and then we're talking about a commercial transaction here. And if you have a surplus, you have basically 2 options what you can do. You can decide to bank it for the future, and as in real banks, you won't get interest on banking it. So you just put it there and keep it for the future, or you can find someone who you want to pool with. So these are the 2 big groups of decisions you have to take in FuelEU. And the third one, and that becomes quite obvious when you know shipping a bit better, unless you're a fully integrated owner-operator, you have partners in the game. And none of this can be done alone. So as an owner, you've got to talk with the manager, you have got to talk with the operator, and vice versa, and find ways how to jointly generate these benefits and how to then distribute them between the different stakeholders. Let me take you through a simple example. I'm trying to keep it as simple as it can be, but there's indefinite levels of complexity if you want to. We're taking a container ship, small one, she's sailing in Europe, intra-European trade only, not getting out of Europe, all straightforward stuff. And let's assume she has got all the latest energy-saving devices installed that we can think of. That in itself creates no benefit under FuelEU. FuelEU just looks at the energy consumed on board independent of how it's generated. But what's important, she burns in this case 12,000 tons of HFO and 1,000 tons of MGO. And if you put these numbers into the formulas you saw on my second slide, that will accumulate a compliance deficit, because it's conventional fuel, of around 327 tons measured in VLSFO equivalents. And the EU asks you for a penalty of 2,400 euros per ton of VLSFO equivalent, which means you're accumulating a penalty payment to the EU of around 800,000 euros for this vessel sailing with conventional fuels starting January 1st next year. That is a base case. Now let's assume we are a forward-leaning ship owner, manager, operator with access to the respective fuels, and we do something really crazy. We replace the HFO with a B25. It's not that crazy, but that's where we are driving towards. We're replacing it with B25, and in FuelEU, the feedstock of the B component of the biofuel becomes really relevant, but let's assume it's basic rape oil, and it's just making it above the threshold of the EU. What you have to consider is the LCV of biodiesel is around 10% lower than that of conventional fuel, so you need more volume, and unfortunately biodiesels are significantly more expensive. you could get rate-based biodiesels in Europe at around $1,200 a ton currently. So that's the economic starting point. From a compliance perspective, this will suddenly generate a surplus because biodiesel is assumed to be roughly only half of the emissions of HFO. And the surplus will equate to 973 tons of VLSFO equivalent, again, versus this regulation. And we'll just take two options, two out of the many options that you can do with that surplus. You can just say, well, for other vessels that are sailing on HFO, I'll keep them on HFO and I'll use the surplus to compensate for that. I'll pool internally and I'm all good with one vessel going for B25. Or you can look for someone outside of your group. We heard Mark from Ardmore talks this morning about going with proven fuels. Let's assume you do that in the future too. Maybe someone would approach you and say, hey, you've accumulated a deficit. You would have to pay 2,400 euros penalty per ton. I'm offering you my surplus for 2,000 euros a ton. Maybe. And maybe you say, cool. Maybe you say, no. But these markets will start to exist early next year. And if I run this now into numbers from a financial perspective, what would it look like? For each ton of HFO replaced by this blend of B25 with rape-based biodiesel, where we consider the higher LCV, the bunker cost per ton would go up by around 187 euros. I'm doing all of this in euros because the penalties in Europe are European euros, right? So bit higher well prices for the 25% component and a higher volume that you need, 187 euros higher bunker cost. But at the same time, you save on the penalty that you would have to pay otherwise, and you generate the surplus that you could sell. In our assumption in this case here for 2,000 euros, I believe it will be a bit lower, but just to make the point, let's say 2,000 euros for the surplus. And suddenly you are saving versus the base case 240 euros on the FuelEU penalty scheme combined with the pooling. And then the EU says any biodiesel component in our fuels is zero emissions, which means zero ETS cost. So you're saving on the ETS 25%, so 555 euros is saved too. So if you're going for B25, even though you're paying significantly more for the bunker, you're actually saving 110 euros per ton of HFO that you replace with this blend. And if you remember the 13,000 tons and some ups and downs on the valuations, we're talking about 1.3 million euros that you are saving for this vessel alone. And that is rate-based. If you're going into something like waste-based biofuels, so waste cooking oil, animal fat-based diesels, and do B25 based on that, you're actually saving 3.8 million in this business model. So it's significant savings, and that's the reason, obviously, why all the big European liners are trying to gobble up all the waste cooking oil supplies currently available in Europe. Now, before you all send WhatsApps to your CFOs and say, get me that bunker, two caveats to this. One, it requires the owner, the manager, and the operator to collaborate. Because this will have to trickle through the charter parties, the shipments, to involve everyone in the stakeholder domain, and it will require everyone to be really informed about the mechanics of this regulation and the commercials behind it. And the second caveat, it's a bit of a zero-sum game. Right? For everyone selling a surplus, there will be someone buying it. For everyone ignoring it, there will be someone having to pay a penalty. So it really pays to be on your feet and quick in this game and define your strategy wisely. So what would we propose to do? It's a very straightforward approach, as you would find in any management model, I would guess. You start by defining a baseline. So where do we stand if we do nothing? Where do we stand if we operate as we always did? What is our position then? Second question, you start to simulate different scenarios. What if I used B20 here, B25 there, only on one vessel, on all vessels, probably not on all. What I play with different bunkers, should I go for shore power in 2 years from now? You simulate different outcomes and you make an, I would call it, operational plan, level 1, and level 2, you simulate the different decisions, what you can do with your compliance balance. What I would like you to take away from this very quick presentation is basically 3 things. A, FuelEU is way more complex than other regulations initiated by the EU so far. It will not be doable with Excel. We've seen people try it. We have not seen anyone succeed in it. Secondly, I would like you to look at FuelEU not just, oh God, another tax, but look at the opportunity in it and the opportunity to change the course of your financial performance based on the decisions you take. And thirdly, I would challenge you to take a very commercial perspective and not just a technical or compliance perspective. Having said all that, I'm available for discussions later, and I thank you very much for your attention.